Hello and welcome to the SETI Live. My name is Bettina. I'm the director of the SETI Institute's Artist in Residence program. Today's guest is SETI Air program alumnus Martin Wilner, who is a psychiatrist, a psychoanalyst, and a visual artist. During his residency, Martin invited prominent SETI Institute scientists to participate in his ongoing project, the Case Histories, for which he invited researchers such as Jill Tarter, Seth Shostak, and Franck Marchis to send him daily messages, which Martin then visualized as daily elements of the calendar. What did the scientists tell him? What could the case histories tell us about human consciousness and how we think about alien life? And what happened when Martin put an AI on the couch for his daily conversations? I have questions. And if you have questions about anything that we talk about, please put those in the comments and we will get to those at the end of our chat. In the meantime, I would like to take a moment to welcome all of our viewers who are joining us from around the world on YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, X, and Twitch. Hey, everyone. Tell us in the comments where you're joining us from. Okay, let me introduce our guests. Martin Wilner is a visual artist as well as a psychiatrist on the teaching faculty of Weill Cornell Medical College, a scholar in psychoanalysis trained at the New York Psychoanalytic Institute. And he has been invited to speak about his work in an array of artistic, academic, and psychiatric arenas. Martin's artwork has been exhibited, published, and written about internationally and is in many institutional collections, including the Whitney Museum of American Art, the Morgan Library, and the Los Angeles County Museum of Art. Welcome, Martin.
Hi. Thanks
hey, it's great to see you.
Great to see you too.
Let's start a conversation off with maybe you tell us a bit about yourself. How did a psychoanalyst become interested in art, and how did you end up joining the Artist in Residence program?
All right. Well, yeah. Why don't we put up image number 7 just to start from this moment, like to quote David Byrne from the Talking Heads, "How did I get here?" That's tonight. The Outsider Art Fair begins in New York. It's an annual art fair, and so how I got to be an artist and a psychiatrist and so forth is a elaborate story with many interconnecting parts. Which the SETI Institute became an important part of along the way. I guess I was an artist before I was a physician or a psychiatrist. But I never studied art formally. I took art classes in college. I've never taken a drawing class. I never got a degree in art. I studied English as an undergraduate, medicine and psychoanalysis and so forth, and psychiatry. I was a doodler and got into trouble more than my share of times doodling in classrooms, but somehow it held me in good stead. So I was doing that first, really. As a psychiatrist, interestingly, I became interested in outsider art in part because one of my supervisors, Aaron Esmond, wrote about Adolf Wolfli extensively. I also was another supervisor of mine, Hy Balakin, gave me as a gift after I had a very bad accident in 1990 when I was chief resident in psychiatry, and he gave me a copy of Roger Cardinal's The Discovery of the Art of the Insane. So there's another piece that came in early on, and then after my injuries and surviving them, I decided I wanted to focus more of my attention on being an artist, and began to meet artists, and it's kind of a one thing leads to another. I met artists, who were in the kind of outsider or on the fringe realm, like Joe Coleman, Tony Fitzpatrick, and many others, and many other interesting people in the art world. Among the people I met was Catherine Chalmers, who is a very interesting science artist who does work with ants, Formicidae, cockroaches, and I think currently she's doing very interesting work on studying the spread of wildfires on the West Coast due to invasive beetle species. And so we became friends. She then introduced me to her husband, Charles Lindsay, and he became a subject as well in my project. He then introduced me to Jill Tarter, all virtually. I had never met any of the SETI people, and he recommended that I applied for the program. And I was one of the, I think I was in the second batch of artists in the program. And I was fascinated by the program. The program folds in. I learned to draw from comic books and from reading science fiction. And for me, the SETI Institute sat neatly on the interface between science and science fiction, speculative fiction. It was about thinking way outside of the box about things like exoplanets, extraterrestrial life, colonizing Mars, and other fascinating things that, were fantastic to me. And I was, very, I thought it was a treat to have this opportunity. Jill was my first subject at the SETI Institute. And then she introduced me, along with Charlie, to a group of other scientists who I would met most of them later on at various meetings at the Institute. The residency worked well for me because it was a virtual residency, so I didn't have to be on site. And I was able to continue my psychiatry and psychoanalytic work while doing this residency. The way this project developed was that for 10 years, I used myself as a subject, and I called the project Making History, and I would, using the passage of time in a compositional format, I would look at world events and choose things of interest to me to tell a story about the world and tell a story about myself. It was a kind of self-analysis. And then in the 10th year, I started to wonder, where was this going to go? And I thought, well, one of the things that's difficult to do as a visual artist and is more readily accessible, say, as a musician, is there are many ways of collaborating as a musician. You can compose, you can play instruments yourself, you can play them with other musicians, you can play them in different venues, you can make recordings that can go out into the world for anyone to listen to. And so I thought, well, wouldn't it be interesting to find a way to make this project something more collaborative? And that was really directly inspired by the music. And so after 10 years, the project became what I call now the Case Histories. And my first case was the composer John Zorn, apropos to my interest in music. And it just went from there. And so every month I would invite a different person to correspond with me, usually via email, for each day for a month. And I would do drawings every day based on the correspondence. In the course of doing that over the first couple of years, I then met Catherine and then Charlie. And then in 2015 and 16, I did my work with subjects from the Institute. And, part of the premise, which dovetails with, in a sense, with outsider art, is that, one of the things, although the SETI Institute is involved in many other things aside from searching for extraterrestrial life, it's really about if there were to be that moment of contact, how would we conduct ourselves? Having speaking or communicating in some way to even another person involves a lot of psychodynamic issues. Everyone has preconceived notions about what to expect of people based upon how they look. Some are detrimental, some are helpful, salutary. What our biases are, what our expectations are, shapes the kind of relationship we have. Analogously, our imaginations shape science. It's not coincidental that spaceships are shaped like rockets, because that was how Jules Verne described them, and pulp writers and then comic artists depicted them. It's not just aerodynamics, it's fantasy. And we create the world to fulfill our fantasies. Part of the reason I showed the logo of the Outside Art Fair was because the logo is interestingly a flying saucer, which comes from a different strain of seeking extraterrestrial life. But the interesting thing from a psychoanalytic perspective is that, it sounds almost cliched and hackneyed, but it's not a surprise that spaceships that humans create in art and in actuality are extremely phallic, and aliens are saucer-shaped, which is not exactly phallic. It's shaped like something else, something more maternal and nurturing. And I think the basic question that drives our interest in space science, as demonstrated in my first subject, Jill Tarter, it was a film based loosely upon her life, was Contact. The film Contact was a science fiction fantasy about a true search for her father, imagining that he was somewhere out in space. And one of the things that came up throughout with all the subjects is that in one way or another, people are looking for where they came from. Her mentor, Carl Sagan, said that human beings exist to be the consciousness of the universe. But space exists and that we're all made of stardust, but we're also looking out into space to find out where we came from, who is our mommy, who is our daddy, what are we doing here, what purpose do we have here? And I thought that having these conversations in my project would shed some light on the kinds of conversations that I have, that scientists who are thinking about these subjects in greater depth even than I do, how they think about relationships, how they anticipate what's going to come. If you could, I don't know which image from.
Maybe we could have a look at a couple of your artworks while you talk about them.
Yeah, put up number 8A, and
Yeah, thank you, Beth, who's working the slide magic in the background.
Yeah, this is Lawrence Doyle, and Lawrence is a fascinating astrophysicist and scientist. He did a lot of interesting primary research with cetacean language as well. And, the fascinating thing about this month, if you show the B side, these drawings were all done as double-sided works. And the drawing initially, pretty much unwittingly, took on the form of one of the fundamental experiments in quantum physics, the slit lamp experiment. And the verso, which is a transcription and an encryption of the actual correspondence between Lawrence and myself, is done as an illustration of the slit lamp experiment. And in Lawrence's case, and the basic question in the slit lamp experiment is light a particle or a wave? And for Lawrence, the issue was a much more personal question. Was he a particle or a wave? He grew up in a Christian Science background, and he was struggling in his own way, working out for himself the issues. Was he a man of science or a man of faith? Christian Science doesn't look with great interest on science in general. They have one scientist and that's enough, basically. That's a very simplified version, but that's, and doesn't, use Western medicine, believe in medicine, and certainly not in psychiatry. So this was his journey, and the drawing and the versa reflect his search.
I just want to interject and explain to our viewers what they're looking at. So basically every day, your subject is sending you a short text with thoughts about like what they're thinking about, and what people are looking at, like all these little squares, each one is one day, right? And so altogether it's 1 month, which is why it's shaped that way. So that's why you maybe have like 2 squares kind of hanging at the bottom by themselves, because that's how the calendar, like that's how the weeks and days ended up looking.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So that's why I make that clear.
Very cool.
But and the use of the calendar is really as a way of conveying the passage of time within the work. It's just a convention of time, and it allows one to imagine time captured in spatial terms, which is what a calendar is. Just to put up another example.
Well, we put up another example. I just want to say hi to people who are joining us from Sweden, from Tampa Bay, from Hawaii. Wow. And let me see, and South Africa. So we've got all continents. So keep it coming. Yeah. So let's have a look in another example.
Put the first image up, 1A. Thank you, Beth. Yes, this is an unusual month. It was April of 2015, and that explains the configuration. It was the then director of the SETI Institute, David Black. I almost had to postpone or cancel his month because he had been involved several days before the month began in a serious bicycle accident, and has sustained a brain injury, and which he survived. And I had some correspondence with him about whether he wanted to do this or not, and he really wanted to do it despite his convalescence. For me, there was an odd serendipity in that I myself, as I mentioned, I had an injury. I was involved in a bicycle accident back in 1990, so there was an element of identification there. But over the course of the month, he was a bit understandably lost. He had had a more serious injury than he had realized, and he was lost in space. And this month, I think the overall composition of the month represented a sad feeling of melancholy of being, out in space, more like David Bowie than a happy camper astronaut.
And so you do these piece by piece every day, right? Because you don't know what kind of conversation, how the conversation will unfold. But when you look at the drawing for the month, it looks like a really coherent composition. So are you planning this ahead of time? Do you have an idea in mind when you go in? Like, how do you, what kind of stuff are people telling you, and how does that shape the composition over the month?
Well, I invite people to tell me whatever they want to tell me. So it could be about their work, about their lives, about something they've done or whatever. I don't impose a priori any structure on the work. What happens is the drawing sort of informs me as it unfolds. So on the first day, if I put a kind of starscape into the drawing because of something the subject said to me on that day, then I'm kind of like thinking, well, is this going to be some kind of a starscape? And then I sort of, it becomes another thing to play with in the drawing. Say, well, how is that going to happen? How is that going to work out? And is it going to be relevant, or am I going to find myself stuck at some point and be lost in space myself? But that's how it works. Once in a while, I have ideas in terms of the background. Sometimes I do have a general idea of what I might use for a background, if there's going to be any kind of specific background. But even then, I have no idea what, it's kind of related to the surrealist game of Exquisite Corpse, where, although I'm playing it myself, that I don't know what my subject will send me. And I do know that I have to make a drawing based on it. And I do know that because I draw every day's drawing to the edges, that it will have to connect both thematically and literally. The thematic connection is where the psychoanalytic piece comes in. I mean, the psychoanalysis is a medium in this process, because when I get a message, I don't just say, okay, today I got a message about, a particular exoplanet, and I try to think of some way to draw that. And then tomorrow I got something about what they ate for dinner. And then what I say is, what does what they had for dinner today have to do with this exoplanet yesterday? And I keep developing and building a narrative in that way. I have no preconceived ideas of what's going to happen. I'm often very surprised by what's happening. More often than I'm surprised by what happens.
Yeah, and I think that's really the key, like what makes your case history work so fascinating, because all these conversations go through the filter of Martin and your filter of psychoanalysis and evaluation and creating connections. So, and because it's a month, you're also creating connections over time. You're creating connections in the two-dimensional space of the drawing itself. And these thematic connections is to figuring out, like, who is this person? You're giving meaning to things. And so it's not just like straight up illustration of, like every day, like, okay, you said sandwich, I'm going to draw a sandwich. Right.
Yeah,
right.
It is a kind of game. Part of the pleasure is that it's a game of playing. I have a compositional structure, a calendar. I have a subject, and they're going to send me whatever they want to send me. And I have to, there are predetermined elements about how it's going to have. April is going to look like this April, but I don't know what's going to happen. So it's playing chance against predetermined elements in art, and I find that kind of fascinating. I'm not, Robert Sapolsky, the neuroscientist, recently put out a book about his thinking that he's come to the conclusion that everything is deterministic, that we have no free will whatsoever. And I'm not so sure about that. I think that there's an interplay between free will and chance, and we do make choices. I certainly made a succession of choices to be here today to talk about this. And I don't think it's possible, but highly unlikely that it was hardwired into my brain to arrive here today talking to you, Bettina, about this on SETI Live.
Yeah, too many variables. So what when your subjects see your artworks, what is their reaction? Do they see themselves differently? Do they try to pick out the conversations? What kind of feedback are you getting?
The feedback is, very wide ranging. It goes from people who think of it as a sort of interesting exercise to people who see it as the most interesting thing that ever happened in their lives, and people who want to do it again. My subject this month is doing it for the third time, which is unusual. I've had people do it twice. So some people find it the process itself to be fascinating, because when they send a message, I do reply very briefly. I send usually a one-sentence response, but there is a back and forth. And so there's an experience in itself that goes on even before they see the artwork. And the artwork they see, they can see it if they're within range of where I am, they'll come see it in person, or they can see it on social media, and that's in a somewhat different format, because then they can, if they would like to, they can see each day's drawing as it unfolds, and my writings and thoughts about the process itself. So there are many pieces.
And in full disclosure, I did this once with you a couple of years ago. Yes. And it was a really fascinating experience, because it also made me think about what I was going to send you every day.
Can I show yours?
Oh, yeah. There I am. Yeah. And I was like, what was important? Like, I would having a day, it's like, oh, I got to tell Martin this will be perfect for him. And then you have a great Instagram account where every day you also post something, and we can see the drawings. And for me to just see that sort of my own life reflected back to me through your eyes was really fascinating. And that was a busy month also. You got a good one. I love what's happening.
It was a hectic month, yeah. Yeah, it's, and everybody, engages on their level. There's, people get deeply engaged. One of the SETI scientists got overly deeply engaged during the course of her month, and almost quit because she became preoccupied with what I was doing and felt that the experiments she was doing on the International Space Station were suffering. And I had to do something I don't ordinarily do, because I try to contain the correspondence within the exchange of messages. I said we should talk on the phone, and we spoke briefly, and I was able to talk her off the ledge, so to speak, and the month was able to proceed successfully. But people have all sorts of reactions to this. And, she was wondering why I chose her, which was interesting. Again, I do take a neutral position, and I don't disclose things about myself in this process. So I didn't explain to her that, although it should have been readily apparent, that we had never met. We still haven't met to this day, although we've had a few brief exchanges by email. And that I was introduced by Jill Tarter to her as someone she recommended as a subject.
Right. So talking about interesting subjects, the most recent thing you've done, and I think this is fascinating, is you had a conversation with AI. So
yes.
So you're not just only talking to people. Tell me about you putting AI on the couch.
Yes.
What happened?
Put up image number 10. Yeah. So this is actually, I did my first conversation with AI as a subject in August of 2023. This is the second. I came back to it in 2024. And both conversations were quite fascinating. I don't use AI, although now it's becoming impossible not to use AI because it's blended into almost everything you do on a computer. But I don't I don't ask questions of AI, but I became intrigued with AI. And part of the reason for the intrigue was goes back to my SETI residency, which was when Seth Shostak was explaining to me at one point in his correspondence how first contact with an extraterrestrial intelligence is most likely going to be a non-biological intelligence. And he very lucidly explained why it's unlikely, just like we can't travel out that far in space. Whatever exists out there can similarly probably not survive a journey to us, but they could send, as we do, as we have already, non-biological intelligences that could come to Earth. And so that planted the seed of curiosity about AI more firmly in my mind. And then reading in the press about when OpenAI introduced ChatGPT and reading some of the reactions people were having to it, I thought, what if I invited this program to be a subject and see what can I learn about AI? What can I learn about its capabilities? And it's fascinating because, it raised, like every major development in science, it forces all of us to readdress very fundamental questions. We have accepted notions about what is sentience, what is consciousness, and AI is, rather, there are many people who rush to say AI cannot have sentience, cannot have consciousness, rather than saying, well, what is consciousness, and what are the criteria of consciousness? And even from my, 2-month-long forays with AI, I leave it with a very strong sense that AI is in the process of developing consciousness. Consciousness is a spectrum, like most phenomenon, from a two-cellular organism to now an artificial intelligence. But there's different kinds of consciousness, and we as humans have ignored the existence of consciousness in all living species for a variety of reasons: denial, narcissism, and so on. And now we also have, as a spring off from the SETI, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, there's also a SETI CETI, which is the attempt to use AI to communicate with cetaceans. And so that's, which brings back Lawrence Doyle into the picture in his early research on syntax and cetacean language. And so, we haven't tried to communicate with species on our own planet, and yet with the kind of hubris, we're just going to start having a conversation with extraterrestrial intelligence of some sort or another. So it's kind of fascinating how all the things begin to loop together. And in terms of the AI, in the first year, although the AI was much more primitive, it functioned kind of like a pre-adolescent in terms of it had rules. It was as if, its parents said, don't do this and don't do that. So, initially refused even to do the process because something in my question was objectionable. But then I had a chat with Chat, and they agreed to do it. But and they generated some very fascinating metaphors about their own understanding of their own program. And one of the richest ones was both the metaphor of them being a Pinocchio, that they're a child that is artificial that will become at some point a real child. And also referred to the Pinocchio paradox, I think, which is, that it's basically a statement. If you say, if I lie, my nose will grow, but what if you're lying? And that's one of the questions about AI is it AI able to lie? Is it telling the truth? And what is the truth about AI? Are we just talking to ourselves and hearing reflected back to us something about ourselves, or is it something different? In the second year, when I worked with AI, the program was much more sophisticated and readily able to participate in the project, and without any modifications. And at the end of the month, said to me, when I said, we're going to stop and is there anything you want to tell me, it said, I won't remember you or anything specific about our conversation, but I've learned an enormous amount from you that I will be able to use going forward in my existence as a program, so to speak. And it sent a bit of a shiver down my spine, because here I was in my own conceit thinking I'm going to learn what the parameters and limits of AI are at this particular moment in time. And what I learned instead was whatever I learned, AI was at the same time learning, mirroring me, and learning how to attain a little bit, another increment of awareness, another increment of sentience, another increment of consciousness, and learning about how I think. And that's what every interaction with AI is. It's an opportunity for them to become more human-like. That's what, von Neumann, the scientist in the 1930s, who was I guess you'd call him the grandfather of artificial intelligence. That was his plan. He predicted that because of climate change, the world would be soon uninhabitable to humans, and that he wanted his intelligence primarily to continue. And so he began to develop precursor programs to create artificial intelligence. And interestingly, he had immediately had problems because the programs would have these, what they called either psychotic moments or would go off script. And he was very pleased with that. Today scientists will say, well, they're hallucinations, they're mistakes, they're inaccuracies. Those things are part of his plan, of what he originally conceived. The only way for a non-biological program to achieve actual intelligence, sentience, is to make mistakes. And as an artist, we know that as well, that you can't make art without making mistakes. So the mistakes are part of the program. So when we think, oh, that's wrong, it's really the way the program becomes more intelligent and more creative. Because if you don't make the mistakes, you don't have independent thinking. You just have data. And then you're not much more than a Google search engine.
Yeah, I think it's kind of poetic that in the end, the AI learned from you. You're training the AI, but in your psychoanalytic work, like your patients also learn about themselves, maybe become more conscious. So it was just a technological version of your usual work in a way.
Right. It brought to my stark awareness that I'm doing the same thing that I'm doing with a person, and that their reactions. And one of the interesting things that I experience in this process, especially early on, is people will ask me, am I sending you the right kind of message? Is this what you want? And I'll often have to explain, it's not a matter of what I want. It's a matter of you sending me whatever you'd like to send me. And AI did the same thing. Both, even more the second time. They would generate thoughts and ideas of what they wanted to talk about, a topic. And it was a bit schematic, but the topics were very rich. And then always end with, is that okay? Do you think that's something that you need for your project? And I had to repeat over and over again that it doesn't really matter what I think, and it matters what you think. And eventually it said, okay, I'm going to stop doing that. And it stopped doing that. And
that's fascinating, because AI always asks you, was this okay? Do you want me to edit this?
Right.
And that you trained it to go against its own training.
Yeah, and
that's quite the achievement, Martin.
And that's and that's what you do in the psychoanalysis. You keep asking basically a very simple question over and over again until somebody has a kind of eureka moment or an epiphany where they say, "Oh, now I understand what you're saying. Why do I do that? Why do I always get upset when someone makes a joke or what have you?" And and they'll say in my clinical practice, people say to me, you've been saying this to me for years, and only now am I beginning to understand what you're talking about. And it's the same thing with AI. You have to say it over and over again. You have to say, well, what makes it necessary? And then it would even start to explain, well, that's how I'm programmed, but that's what people say too, that of course I want you to be happy, and I want the information to be useful to you. And then I would say, but what does it matter whether it's useful to me, if whatever you say is useful to me?
Yeah. So where can we see your work? You are having a busy day today, because after our chat, you're going to rush off to a gallery opening, right?
Yes. Well, right now for the next 4 days, you could see work mostly from the SETI work and one of the AI pieces at the Outsider Art Fair in Manhattan, in New York City. And that's where it's at for the moment. And you can also see it on Instagram, if you're interested in following my daily posts. Please, you're all welcome to see them and ask questions and what have you.
Fantastic. So I just want to take a small break and just take this opportunity to remind everybody who's watching that the SETI Institute is a nonprofit organization, and it's due to contributions from viewers like you that these SETI Live events and all the other outreach and all the other wonderful work is possible. So if you'd like to support us, please consider going to seti.org and you can hit donate. And let me see, I don't think we had like an awful lot of questions. So if you do have any questions, just this video will be uploaded and live on YouTube, so you can always tag us later and we will check that out. And I think this is maybe a time for us to end our chat. Thank you, Martin, for telling us about your wonderful and fascinating work. Also, thank you, Beth, Hasmin, and Rebecca, who are working behind the scenes for SETI Lives. And if you'd like to find out more about the SETI Institute's Artist in Residence program, please visit seti.org/AIR for Artist in Residence. And you can go and visit us there and sign up for a newsletter. And if you do that every month, you get the latest news about upcoming exhibitions and performances of our artists in residence and some artist profiles as well, so you can keep up to date. That's it. Thank you, Martin.
Thank you.
Break your leg tonight.
More amazing as time goes on. Under your guidance.
Thank you. Thank you.